My name is Chris Peachment, and I'm now a full-time writer. When I was in the UK, when I was in London, I worked as a journalist. First of all, I was a film critic for a magazine called Time Out, which is quite popular in London. And after that, I went to the Times newspaper, where I became the arts editor and then the books editor. I looked after the arts pages and the books pages. Crete is a very interesting island. It's the biggest of the Greek islands, and it differs very much between the east and the west side of it. We're living in Chanià on the western side, and we have very tall mountains behind us with a lot of snow, and so there's a lot of water that comes down in spring, and it's very, very green. At the other end of the island there's not so much water, so it's much more brown, much more like a Mediterranean country. So we're lucky here in Crete. There's a lot of agriculture, which is the main economy, and also there's tourism. The tourists come in the summer and they spend quite a bit of money. It spreads around the local population, and that's good. So it's a comfortable place, Crete. Now if you go to Athens, you'll find a lot of unemployment and unhappiness and homeless people and so on. But here in Crete, it's a fortunate island. It's very, very comfortable, and whatever happens on the mainland doesn't affect Cretans very much. They get on with their lives and they be happy. When I was a journalist, I got an incredible number of interviews with people in the film world, and I think one of my favourites was with Fellini at Cinecittà in Rome. He was a very nice man, very sweet-natured, very amusing. We both laughed a lot while afterwards we had lunch, and I think he was one of my favourites. And this one is where I was talking to Marcello Mastroianni, who was equally nice. He was very, very sweet-natured, very gentle man. When I was young, I thought I would end up living in Italy, because I loved Italy and I loved the art there. But it was my wife who persuaded me. My wife is an actress, and during the 1970s she was in a TV serial in England for the BBC, and it was shot in Crete at Ios Nikolaitis, and she fell in love with the place. And when we married in the 1990s, she brought me out here, and I too fell in love with the place too. And so we bought a little house which we used as a holiday house, and when we both retired at the age of 65, we decided to come and live here. Because now most of my friends when they ask me, why did you move, they usually think it's because of the weather, the sun and so on. Actually, I don't like the sun very much. I burn, and so it's not the sun, it's the Greek people. They are the real reason why I'm here. I love Greek people. Towards the end of that time, I began to write books. My first book was about Caravaggio, the Italian artist, and my second book was about a British poet called Andrew Melville, who was living in the time of the English Civil War in the 1650s, and they both got quite good reviews. Since I came out here in the past 5 years, I've started writing thrillers, because I find them very interesting to write. And people seem to like reading thrillers. So because I was a journalist, I travelled all over the world, and so the first thriller I wrote was set in Japan, on a film set in Japan, and the second one is set in Cannes, in the south of France, and I've got a third one on the go now, which will be set on a Greek island at a New Age centre, a holistic centre. So. Well, this is my first book, Caravaggio, and it came about on a trip to Rome. I was with a woman who was a painter, and we were passing a church, San Luigi de Francesi, in Rome, and she said, "Come in, I want to show you something." And we went in, there were 3 Caravaggios on the wall, and I looked at one of them for about 10 seconds, and I suddenly felt myself lift into the air. I couldn't believe what a good painting it was fantastic. I'd never seen a painting like it before. So after that I travelled around Italy, just looking for Caravaggios. I went to Naples, to Sicily, to Malta, just looking at them all, wherever I could find them. And I read about Caravaggio, and I realised that there was a lot missing in his life, that we didn't know what he was doing. There were gaps in his history. And I thought, well, that's a gift for a fiction writer. You know, you can make up what was happening. You've got to make it plausible, you've got to make it possible. But and he was a very interesting character because he was quite a violent man. He had a terrible temper, which he couldn't control. And he killed a man in a brawl. There was an argument over a tennis match, and he got into a brawl and he killed a man with his sword. So he had, he had to go on the run. After that, the Pope put a death sentence on his head, and he had to run for it. And he went first to Naples and then Sicily, and wherever he went, he was painting. Though he painted very fast and left paintings behind. He would paint for money and live off that. And his paintings are extraordinary because, well, I'm not an art historian, but they are very, very true to life. They are true to psychological life. He used people around him, street people, ordinary people, to represent biblical figures. And he was often in trouble with the church because of that. But there is a psychological truth to his paintings, which is very vivid, very moving. The second book I wrote in the UK is called The Green and the Gold. It came about because of my interest in a poet called Andrew Melville, who was a friend of John Milton's. He's not very much known nowadays, and indeed his life is cloudy. Nobody knows much about what he did, but it seems he was a spy at the time. And he lived through the English Civil War, which is a very interesting period. And he managed to stay on both sides of the war. He worked for King Charles I, and then he worked for Cromwell, and then he worked for the monarch King Charles II when he came back. So he was a man who walked a tightrope very cleverly. And it's visible in his poetry. His poetry is very ambiguous. It's very hard to understand fully. It's full of ambiguities. So he struck me as an a very interesting English character. And I like the Civil War as the background too. So that's how that came about. My first thriller that I wrote while out here is the first of a set of 3 books, a trilogy. And it's set in Japan. I went out there to be on the set of a film by Kurosawa called Ram, which in Japanese means chaos. And it was Kurosawa's version of King Lear, the Shakespeare King Lear. And it was a fascinating film to watch. And I became very friendly with the producer, a Frenchman. And so I decided to set it in Japan because it's a very exotic location which I couldn't fully understand. Japanese culture is very difficult to come to terms with. And the producer's grandson is kidnapped on the set, and he calls on the hero, who is an English private detective. So he goes out there and he's completely at sea. He doesn't know what's going on at all, and so he has to try and find this kidnapped boy. And well, he realizes finally that it is one of the producer's staff who bears a grudge against him, and he's organized the boy to be kidnapped by the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia, and that's how he solves it. But it's very difficult for him because he doesn't understand Japanese, and he doesn't know really quite what he's doing. He's at sea. The second book in the trilogy is called Ricochet, and it's set in Cannes, the south of France, at the time of the film festival, because I'd been a film critic and I've been there many times, so I knew about it. The man on the cover is a French actor called Lino Ventura, and one of the Japanese villains from the first book is in Cannes, and he's after the detective for revenge. But also a bomb goes off. It's during the time when Arab Muslim bombing, Islamists were setting off bombs, and a bomb goes off and kills his old friend, the French producer. So his motive is revenge. He's got to find these people. And the French detective also wants to find out what's going on, so they use each other to uncover this Arab cell that's setting off bombs. And the film festival is going on in the background. It's just background material. It's just the scene that they find themselves in. So that's quite full of action. And again, it has an exotic setting. People like the south of France. Well, my first two books I got published in the UK, and they're still available on Amazon if you want to buy them. I've now lost touch with the whole literary scene in London. So I think my agent and my publisher that I dealt with, they've both retired now. So the three thrillers I get published out here. But anybody is welcome to buy them. Just email me on chrispeachment@gmail.com and I will send you a copy. So, thanks to Story Answers TV, and I hope to see you again.